Greetings, dear friends. My name is Vasyl Pekhno. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and right now I'll be presenting you a fresh live update on Ukrainian battle map situation as of July the 11th. So please join and watch this video, like it, share it, leave your comments below this video, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'll start with some diplomatic news, which have been reported about changes in the policy of Donald Trump, President of the United States. So there are really good news to us, to Ukrainians, with which I would like to share with you. Let's begin.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Let's start with some good international news. Donald Trump, the president of the United States of America, yesterday, at least according to Reuters, stated that he's ready to use presidential powers to support and send weapons to Ukraine. What are presidential powers? This is one of the programs through which the United States supports Ukrainian resistance. It is called PDA Presidential Powers or Presidential Drawdown. There are two programs in total. These are USAI and PDA. Under the PDA program, the president, by executive order, directly supplies weapons from the existing stockpiles of the Pentagon's arsenals to the country for which these capabilities are intended. According to various sources, Donald Trump has accumulated between 3 and 8 billion, up to $5.5 billion, which can be allocated under the PDA program specifically to aid Ukraine. According to Reuters, it is reported that Trump could use this authority for an amount of about $300 million, and for the first time during his second presidential term, send some weapons to Ukraine. What kind of weapons these will be is not yet known for certain, but apparently it's about Patriot systems in the sense of defensive weapons, and according to Reuters insiders, there could also be some medium-range offensive weapons. Well, I suspect this could mean ATACMS. So this is good news. Indeed, right now we are starting to have a bit of a honeymoon period with the United States of America. And this step indicates a renewed interest from the US president in defending Ukraine. As the publication noted, it's hard to disagree with that. These are good news to start with, because we desperately need weapons right now. We need them in the sense that we have to hold back the enemy in the areas where they are advancing. Recently, the Pokrovsk-Milnorat agglomeration in particular has raised concerns. It's one of those areas that is causing these questions. For example, deep state analysts are now noting the active efforts of the occupiers targeting the logistics of Dobropillia. So whereas before I mentioned that we had a difficult situation in Torsk and Kostiantynivka because the Russians were targeting the logistics of the rear in that area, now we are starting to see strikes on the logistics of the rear in the Pokrovsk direction, particularly on the settlement of Dobropillia. Deep state analysts have determined that literally over the past 2 nights, the enemy launched more than 100 FPV drones at Dobropillia, more than 100 FPVs. The most important and worst part is that, unfortunately, not all of these FPVs were even aimed at military targets. They are also being launched at civilians. In other words, the Russians are making this territory absolutely uninhabitable, even for basic existence. And well, we understand that without people, even the civilian population that remains there, the military rear won't function properly. So now, unfortunately, Dobropillia is already coming under attack. And in this regard, the Pokrovsk section of the front carries rather significant risks, because right now the enemy is essentially trying to encircle this settlement in a pincer movement and cut off Dobropillia's logistics. This is actually one of the most important supply nodes, supply hubs for Pokrovsk. In addition, in the area of Udačne and Kotlyne, which is the southern section from Pokrovsk, let's mark it with a little square, for example. Here is such a square. Right here in Udačne and Kotlyne, the enemy also intends to advance. Right now, they have intensified combat operations here with the goal of physically reaching the highway and cutting off Pokrovsk from supplies coming from the west, from Pavlograd as well. So there are actually dangerous trends here. And right now, we need weapons more than ever, because the Russians are using their FPVs, including fiber optic FPVs. Now, as our soldiers say, some brigades have already started covering the roads with nets on all sides with their own hands. so that these fiber optic FPVs don't cause disasters on the logistics routes. The brigade started doing all this themselves without waiting for any action from the state. Although now, well, it's actually pointless to expect that any actions from the state are possible directly on the front line. This can be done in the rear covering logistics routes with NetSpot on the front line. It turns out that now this is solely the task of those who want to survive. It's the task of our soldiers, no matter how painful it is to admit, because the road between Pokrovsk and Dobropillia, there's a road here. It goes through Mingrad, roughly like this. And this road is now just a living hell for the destruction of our equipment. Look, our soldiers filmed some fresh footage right from the location showing how they're driving there. Let me rewind to the beginning. There's a burned out pickup truck on the roadside, and here's a truck that's still even smoldering, you could say. And all this is already happening on the highway between Pokrovsk and Dobropillia, which really doesn't help the further defense of Pokrovsk. So the situation here is actually quite difficult. Therefore, I would urge everyone to refrain from any kind of triumphant statements on the topic of the Gaiman. That publication that came out yesterday in the British The Economist about how the Russian summer offensive has already completely stalled and the Russians are suffering the highest losses since the beginning of the war. And there they are drowning in these bloodiest losses since the start of the full-scale invasion. This doesn't quite reflect reality because, first of all, you can't talk about the Russian offensive in the past tense as if it's already over. That's not the case. The Russian offensive is still ongoing. Its intensity is still quite high. Now, once again, the number of assault actions on the front has increased to 200 per day, as reported by our Ukrainian General Staff. So yes, indeed, we are now in the middle of summer, mid-July, but so to speak, this doesn't mean anything yet, friends. It still doesn't mean anything. Ahead lies the end of the summer campaign, and ahead is the continuation of the autumn campaign as well. That is, we can expect about 3, maybe 4 more months of active combat operations from the enemy. The main objective, just to make it clear, the main objective of the enemy until the time when there will be no more foliage, which will be around the end of October or the beginning of November, when all the leaves have fallen and there is no more greenery or cover where you could theoretically hide from drones. So until that moment, even just starting some battles for populated areas is an extremely important task for the Russians, because the only chance for the Russians to survive and not be left out in the open fields is to occupy, or, well, not necessarily occupy, but at least engage in battles for populated areas. Because it is precisely there in populated areas that there are basements, shelters, ruins, and debris, and that's where they can take cover. Otherwise, well, out in the open field, it would simply be genocidal destruction due to the technological resources and drone technologies that are now developing very rapidly, increasing their range and effectiveness. That's why the Russians are trying to engage in as many battles as possible for the settlements of Donbass. Among these, it's worth highlighting, well, in fact, as I mentioned yesterday, and I'll repeat again, to the 9 important settlements. These are Pokrovsk, Mirnorad, Dobropillia, Drushkivka, Kostiantinivka, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Lyman, and here, Siversk. So how many are there? I wasn't lying, exactly 9 settlements. These are the most important objectives for the summer-autumn campaign. Obviously, during this campaign, the Russians won't even get close to some of these settlements. This is already becoming clear now. For some, it's evident they'll be able to force back. In particular, like when we talk about Pokrovsk and Mirnorad, but our troops are doing everything possible to prevent these scenarios. And honestly, American weapons would really help us in this context right now. By the way, Reuters yesterday, in addition to what I already mentioned regarding weapons, also reported that the US has resumed supplying Ukraine with artillery ammunition, as well as GMLRS rockets for the HIMARS multiple launch rocket system. Moving on, besides Pokrovsk, we also have a critically difficult area in Kostiantinivka. The enemy, as I have already mentioned, is using the same scenario in Kostiantinivka as in Dobropillia, shelling Drushkivka, this area to the north and northwest of Kostiantinivka, and shelling the supply routes to Toretsk, which is defending itself on all 180 degrees. And the enemy is trying to break our resistance here. But for this to happen, for the fighting for Kostiantinivka to begin, for any kind of encirclement to be carried out, the enemy will have to break through the resistance at the main defense nodes we have here. These are the Toretsko-Rimivka agglomeration and the Chasiv Yar agglomeration. In particular, in Chasiv Yar, just yesterday, soldiers of the 24th Mechanized Brigade, the defenders of this direction, released footage showing how they destroyed an enemy airborne fighting vehicle. An airborne fighting vehicle typically carries about 10 paratroopers who are riding in this compartment. They repelled such an assault. This happened yesterday, as shown on the 10th of July. This assault took place during the day on the 9th of July. That is a very rare deployment, but right in the middle of the city, you can still imagine the Russians trying to do this, because out in the open fields, this equipment gets destroyed in no time at all. And as you can see from this video, even within a populated area, it is still monitored and destroyed. Thus, this box, this armored vehicle, was detected on approach and destroyed, burned by our soldiers right within the boundaries of Chasiv Yar. In addition, all of those infantrymen were eliminated during the assault. Of course, I have edited these shots. The 10 infantrymen who were part of the landing force in this PMD of the occupiers were completely, you can watch the video in particular on my Telegram channel. Go to my Telegram page, Pekhno_news. This is my personal blog where you can get acquainted with my work, news, and creativity. By creativity, I mean analytical creativity. So I'll be glad to see you there. Friends, join in and subscribe. There's a link to my Telegram blog in the description of this video. In addition to the IFV, the 24th Brigade reported that they also destroyed, along with the paratroopers, a motorcycle, a pickup truck, and an ATV belonging to the occupiers. So, strangely enough, the Russians tried to use this equipment to carry out an attack here within the settlement of Chasiv Yar. Similarly, further south in this Turkish pocket, soldiers of the 28th Mechanized Brigade showed another very strange beast that lives on the front line. These are Russian tanks, I would call them Frankensteins, covered with various nets, different welded add-ons, and chains to protect against FPV drone strikes. And so 2 such tanks set out to assault our positions near Toretsk. And the fighters of the 28th Mechanized Brigade showed how they stop this Russian assault with 2 barn-type tanks. These are drones I know very well. Strike drones are at work. By the way, soon we'll see a moment where the drones are already using elements of machine vision to stop the enemy. That will happen literally right now. Pay attention. No, not here yet. But overall, these tanks are just terrible. Okay, the first one has been neutralized. Now for the second one, by the way, let's go back for a moment. This is the episode where a drone with machine vision is used. You can see that the vehicle was locked onto the armored vehicle, let's say, and then the drone engaged it autonomously, clearly operating under electronic warfare interference. And this Frankenstein, as the soldiers of the 28th Brigade reported, was the second tank destroyed. But yesterday evening, Deep State analysts received exclusive footage from the 28th Brigade soldiers showing how they finished off this Frankenstein. Just look at how terrifying, how monstrous this tank is. Honestly, it's just a beast. After being hit and immobilized, our soldiers are finishing it off. According to the soldiers of the 28th Brigade, just imagine it took attention more than 60 FPV drones to destroy this monster. That is, 60 FPV drones were sent at it because it was really hard to find any weak spot on it. Well, as you can see, there are a bunch of nets, a lot of rebar welded on, a bunch of chains hanging there, and all of this protected the tank from being destroyed. It didn't immobilize it, so to speak, but destroying it was difficult. 60 FPV drones were used. Some of the FPV drones even got stuck. You can see right on top of the tank that they flew in and just got stuck in all that welded rebar without exploding. And why is it important to destroy such a tank? Because in addition to infantry, the Russians also hide EU electronic warfare equipment in these tank sheds, which jam and suppress the signals of our drones. And in this way, they can give other vehicles a chance to get through. So basically, they send this tank out as bait, and it has EW systems installed somewhere hidden under all this Frankenstein-like add-on armor. And these EW systems suppress our drones. And then the Russians get a sort of corridor of opportunity for other vehicles to pass through. Besides that, we can see that these tanks are equipped with mini-mine rollers. So theoretically, it's quite possible that the Russians may soon try to use this kind of welded, reinforced equipment specifically to create corridors for their vehicles to pass through, to clear mines, and to protect themselves in this way, even if it looks ugly, so they can defend against our FPV drone. That's also an option. So all these attacks are mechanized in a rather remarkable way. What I mean is these attacks are very rare. They took place both in the Toretsk area and near Chaziv Yar. Fighters from the 24th and 28th brigades reported on this. Now, friends, let's move to the Zaporizhia front, because yesterday there were reports of some interesting news there. In particular, Petro Andriushchenko, head of the Center for the Study of Occupation, reported the following. Allegedly, our fighters once again struck the railway near Tokmak. He pinpointed the exact location where this happened between Tokmak and Chernihivka, near the settlement of Ostrikivka. There, once again, attention, 20 fuel trucks that were part of the enemy's train convoy were hit. 20 these wagons, 20 tank cars that were transporting fuel. The thing is, Tokmak and these areas, Tokmak, Molokhansk, Chernihivka section of the Russian railway connection located in the occupied part of Zaporizhia region, has been systematically targeted and struck constantly over the past few months. That is, Molokhansk itself and Tokmak itself are coming under these strikes. Now, the sections between Tokmak and Chernivka are being targeted, and the Russians had only just recently managed to clear up after previous strikes. They had just cleared those railway blockages when our troops immediately struck again. Proof, according to Andriushchenko, will be provided a little later. Why is this railway line constantly being targeted here? It's not hard to understand all this, because there is actually only one railway line connecting the occupiers that operates in the southern direction. It runs from Crimea, from here, through Yakimivka, Melitopol, turns toward Molokhansk and Tokmak's branch then onto Chernihivka, and splits north toward Polohi. Although I'm not sure if this railway branch to Polohi is currently operational, since, well, it's clear this is close to the front line. It exists, it goes to Berdyansk, then further to Rozivka, to Volnovaka, and in Volnovaka it splits toward Donetsk and toward Mariupol. In fact, and we see that, well, the thinnest thread, so to speak, the most vulnerable spot where these strikes can be delivered is precisely Tokmak, Molokhansk, Chernihivka on this section of the front. There are also weak points in the area of Rozivka. However, for some reason, our defense forces are not actively working on it. By the way, this is about the leadership of the units. I know that in the Tokmak area, one of the departments is operating there specifically, the so-called Department of Active Operations of the Main Intelligence Directorate. And these guys are working very actively together with our resistance forces, special operations forces, and the resistance movement in the occupied territories. They are actively processing all the necessary information and delivering effective strikes. So this is also about leadership in process. Someone needs to take responsibility and do it. That's why there are points where you can effectively destroy, and Tokmak is an example of this, destroying the enemy's movements, because there is only one single route that runs parallel to the Azov coast. Let me immediately debunk the fakes, because people will now say that the occupiers were building another route there as well. But in reality, it's a fake about the occupiers supposedly wanting to build another line from Mariupol through Berdyansk, somewhere here to Primoz, Pryazovsky, and on to Melitopol. But friends, it does not exist. This is what needs to be emphasized. It does not exist. This is exactly what allows our fighters to strike so effectively at this corridor, and in southern Ukraine to make the enemy's already very complicated logistics in this corridor even more difficult. In fact, knowledgeable military experts say that, well, in this area, the occupiers are truly doomed to have only one railway line of communication, to have a stretch that is under fire, a distance of about 80 kilometers. This is like leading your troops into a section where, well, only a noose remains tightened around them. Just imagine trying to bring something here to Kakhovka, Nova Kakhovka. You would have to haul it either from Crimea or all the way through Zaporizhia, from the territory of the Rostov region, and that's extremely inconvenient. It's extremely difficult, because even in Crimea, you still have to somehow get things there to deliver them. It's a fantastically inconvenient logistics route, and here it's basically doomed. And now our soldiers are making the doomed situation a reality. Along with striking the railway, for example, the Special Operations Forces showed yesterday how they are hitting columns of occupiers in the south. In other words, they scout, detect everything possible and destroy. The Akatsiya self-propelled artillery arrives there precisely. A cluster munition hits the enemy installation, which explodes. Then a series of Akatsiyas and peons follow. Concentrations of enemy personnel are destroyed by those same cluster munitions, as well as columns of vehicles and fuel tankers belonging to the occupiers. The MLRS, the Uragan multiple launch rocket system, is also targeted by our Special Operations Forces. In fact, all these actions, let me repeat, the railway plus similar strikes directed at enemy targets are a tremendous achievement of our people who remain in the occupied territories and help our forces destroy the enemy, because this synergy is extremely, extremely important. So you see, this excellent strike on the convoy of vehicles also happened in the south. But at the same time, to wrap up, I'll add a small note of caution, so to speak, regarding the logistics issue in the south. This note of caution concerns the actions that the occupiers are taking on their own territory in the Russian Federation. Now, let's finish watching this video. So, on the territory of the Russian Federation, in the area of Taganrog, there is a narrow estuary here that flows in, so to speak, from the Sea of Azov, if that's even the right way to put it, flows in. And in this area, in this zone, the Russians are basically building a new bridge right now. Here is a photo of the crane that's working there. Here is the geolocation of these cranes that are operating there. This bridge could be for cars, or it could be a railway bridge. Whatever type it is, it will improve the occupiers' throughput in the south. That's why it would be preferable to strike it in advance before the occupiers can put it into operation. But in general, the prospects for such strikes are actually developing more rapidly, actively, and extensively for us now. That's how things stand, friends. Thank you for your attention. Take care of yourselves. All the best, and see you next time. Goodbye.